I've never considered Shadow a nervous dog before. In fact, for the first 2 years of his life, he was the opposite. Carefree, playful, bounding through the house like a living streak of fur and muscle. A good boy, always watching me with that mix of curiosity and loyalty dogs have. But lately, something has changed. It started small, a subtle difference in how he watched me. He began eyeing me in ways I hadn't noticed before. Not with his usual happy stare, but with something else. A flicker of unease, like he wasn't sure if he knew me. At first, I laughed it off, scratching his ears as I asked, "What's gotten into you, boy?" But he didn't wag his tail. His eyes, those deep, soulful brown eyes, held mine with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just a phase. Dogs get weird sometimes, right? But then it got worse. One night, I woke up with that heavy feeling of being watched. You know that sensation where the room feels just a little too still, a little too charged? My eyes snapped open, and there he was, Shadow, sitting in the corner of the bedroom, his face barely lit by the moonlight streaming through the window. His eyes locked on me, unmoving, unblinking. "Shadow?" I whispered, half expecting him to bound onto the bed like he always did. But he just stayed there, rigid, staring. That's when I noticed it, the trembling. His whole body was quaking, ever so slightly, as if he was fighting some inner urge to run. Or maybe to attack. The sight sent a shiver down my spine, but I swallowed my fear and called him again. He didn't move. By morning, things seemed normal again. He was back to his usual self, wagging his tail, nudging me for breakfast, acting like nothing had happened. But the memory of those trembling limbs, that eerie, unwavering stare, it stuck with me. A cold pit in my stomach. I tried ignoring it. For a while, I convinced myself I was imagining things. But it didn't stop. Each night, the same thing. I'd wake up, feeling those eyes on me, and there he'd be, in the corner, quivering, eyes wide and filled with something I couldn't name. Something that scared me. It got to the point where I couldn't sleep. I was jittery, exhausted, always on edge. I even started locking my bedroom door, leaving him outside at night just to get some rest. But I could still feel it, the weight of his gaze, the heaviness in the air just beyond the door. He was out there, watching. Desperation finally drove me to the vet. I explained everything, my words stumbling out in a rush, trying not to sound insane. The vet listened carefully, a frown creasing her brow as I described the trembling, the watching, the way Shadow seemed wrong. When she examined him, she was silent for a long time, longer than I was comfortable with. Then she looked up at me, her expression unreadable. "I've never seen anything like this before," she said. "Physically he's fine, but there's something. I can't explain it." "Is it some kind of disease?" I asked, my voice thin with hope, because diseases have cures, right? We can fix diseases. Her eyes darkened. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's affecting his mind. I'm going to be blunt with you. It might be kinder to put him to sleep. I think it's going to get worse." "Put him to sleep?" The words hit me like a punch to the gut. No way. Not Shadow. I couldn't do it. Not like this. I needed answers. I needed to know what was happening to him. So I told her no. I wasn't ready to give up on him. I wasn't ready to see where this was going, but I also couldn't turn away. Something inside me, morbid curiosity maybe, needed to know what would happen next. I left the vet's office that day with Shadow beside me, his head low, his body tense. And as we walked out into the parking lot, I caught his reflection in the car window. Those eyes still watching, still quivering, and a flicker of something dark behind them. Something that wasn't my dog. The drive back home was long, or at least it felt that way. Shadow sat in the passenger seat, stiff and silent, his eyes fixated on me the entire time. I kept glancing at him, hoping for some sign of the dog I used to know. The way his ears perked up at a passing car, or the way he'd wag his tail when we stopped at a red light. But there was nothing, just that cold, unwavering stare. The vet's words echoed in my mind, "It's going to get worse." I pulled into the driveway and put the car in park, taking a deep breath. Shadow didn't move. He waited like he knew what was coming next. Maybe he did. "All right, boy," I muttered, pushing open the car door and stepping out into the fading light of evening. I tried to act normal, like this was any other day. "You stay in the yard tonight. I think you need some space." My hand hesitated on the leash as I guided him into the backyard. Normally, Shadow would pull at the line, eager to sniff around, chase squirrels, or find some rogue ball to play with. But tonight he just followed quietly, head low, his gaze never leaving me. That tremor had returned, more violent now, shaking his entire frame like he was cold, though the air was thick with summer heat. I closed the gate behind him, and for a moment he just stood there, watching me through the wooden slats of the fence, his eyes shining in the twilight. Then, slowly, he turned and padded toward the far end of the yard, disappearing into the shadows. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a mistake. Back inside, exhaustion settled over me like a heavy blanket. I hadn't been sleeping well for weeks now, but tonight, for the first time in a while, I felt like I could pass out. Maybe it was the vet's grim diagnosis that had drained me, or maybe it was just the sheer weight of fear pressing down on my chest. I locked the door, double-locked it actually. Then I dragged myself up the stairs into my bedroom and collapsed onto the bed. My eyelids felt like they were lined with lead, pulling me into sleep before I even had a chance to think. But the dreams came. Or maybe they weren't dreams. I can't be sure anymore. It started with the sound of scratching, faint but persistent, like claws scraping against wood. In the haze of sleep, I told myself it was just a branch tapping against the window, or maybe a raccoon rummaging through the trash outside. But then the scratching grew louder, more frantic, like something was trying to get in. My heart raced, but my body wouldn't move. I was trapped in that awful place between waking and dreaming, where everything feels real but nothing makes sense. The scratching stopped. And then I heard it, a low guttural growl, so close it seemed to echo inside my skull. I jolted awake, gasping, my heart slamming against my ribs. The room was pitch black, but something was wrong. I felt it before I saw it. Movement, the bed shifting beneath me as if something heavy was crawling toward me from the foot of the bed. I couldn't move. My limbs were frozen, paralyzed with terror as I struggled to make sense of what was happening. And then I felt it, cold, rough fur brushing against my legs, dragging across the sheets. I tried to scream, but my throat was locked tight, a choked whimper escaping instead. The weight shifted, something heavy wrapped around my ankles, yanking me violently toward the edge of the bed. Panic surged through me as I tried to kick, to pull away, but whatever had me was strong, inhumanly strong. My body hit the floor with a thud, and before I could process what was happening, I was being dragged across the room toward the open window. The ground scraped against my back, my nails clawing at the floorboards as I fought to break free. But it was no use. I was being pulled faster and faster out into the night. And that's when I saw it. In the dim glow of the moonlight filtering through the trees, I caught a glimpse of the thing dragging me. It was low to the ground, hunched over, its body twisted and malformed, fur matted and slick with something dark. Its face. God, its face was all wrong. A snout that stretched too far, teeth jagged and broken, eyes that glowed with a sickly yellow light. It wasn't an animal, not one I'd ever seen. I kicked hard, connecting with its side, and for a brief second, it loosened its grip. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline surging as I turned and ran. Branches whipped against my face as I tore through the forest, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear it behind me, snarling, gaining on me. Its claws scraped against the earth, the sound too close, too fast. Then came the bark, sharp, guttural, and deafening. It wasn't just any bark. It was Shadow's bark. I skidded to a stop, my mind reeling. I turned, and there it was, the creature lunging at me with a speed that defied logic. It slammed into me, sending me sprawling to the ground. Its weight crushed me, pinning me down, its breath hot and rancid against my neck. And in that moment, as I struggled to free myself, I realized, this thing was Shadow. Or at least it had been. His body, his fur, his eyes, they were all wrong, deformed, twisted into something monstrous. But it was him. I knew it. I felt it. Shadow. I choked, my voice barely a whisper. Stop. But he didn't. He couldn't. He snapped at me, teeth gnashing just inches from my face, saliva dripping onto my skin as he snarled and barked in that horrifying, guttural tone. I kicked, punched, did everything I could to free myself, but it was useless. He was too strong. And then I saw it. A glimpse, a flash of something desperate. Shadow's eyes, the real ones beneath the monstrous glow, were wide with terror. Not at me but at himself. His body convulsed, his jaws snapping at the air, but not at me this time. At himself. He was biting at his own flesh, tearing at his limbs like he was trying to rip something away from him. His paws dug into the earth, pulling at his fur, his own teeth gnawing into his legs, desperate to escape something inside him. It was as if he was fighting something that had taken control of him, something he couldn't break free from. Shadow. I screamed again, tears burning in my eyes as I watched him tear at his own body, blood matting his fur as he howled in agony. He didn't stop. He couldn't stop. And then, just before the world went dark, I saw him look at me one last time. His eyes, full of pain, full of regret, begging for help that I couldn't give. The last thing I saw before everything went black was his good, loyal side, fighting with every ounce of strength he had left. Fighting but losing.